Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. We're actually doing a mud test today that I want to do. It hasn't been heavily requested, but I think it's interesting from a historical perspective. We hear all this legend and lore about the P08 Luger being unreliable in dirt and mud. However, they kept it in service through World War I into World War II, and I think the real reason they switched away from the P08 Luger wasn't necessarily a reliability issue, but was based on the manufacturing cost and the ability to make them in the amount of time they needed to make them to get enough of them into the field. Thus, the P38 came about. So, we're going to do this today is we're going to fire this, test fire one magazine, then we're going to dump it in our, in-range copywritten mud and filth, and we're going to see what happens when this gun is subjected to the filth of the Verdun. All right, so there's one magazine, properly fired, no problems whatsoever. Going to dump that mag. I'm actually going to put something into the muzzle because we're not testing the explosion of the gun, we're just testing the reliability. We got a little earplug here we're going to cram in there. Don't do that at home, it's just to keep mud out. Got an extra mag. Gun is hot. And
Safety?
Safety's on. Here we go.
Oh.
Ew! But that's just one side. Let's get the other. I'd say that's pretty bad for what you would consider for a P08 Luger in the mud and filth. What do you think?
I think that's pretty horrible.
All right.
Hold that still for a sec. Let's get a close look at that thing. Yee.
All right, I gotta wipe I am wiping a smidge of mud off to be able to move the safety down. And here we go. That was the first magazine without a problem. I had to tug on the trigger a little harder a couple times. I think there was some dirt or rocks behind the trigger, but I just got through all 8 rounds without really a malfunction. If this gun was as unreliable in the mud and dirt and filth as we hear from the lore, it should have failed right now, I would say. That being said, let's see if we can actually press our luck. We got one more magazine. Man, I'm covered in this stuff. Mag was a little hard to get seated. Chambered properly. That was 100% reliability with a little extra hard pull on the trigger, for a couple rounds, no malfunctions. As far as I'm concerned, the idea of the Luger being an unreliable gun based on mud and dirt is complete crap. It's not true. And the reason that came about, I don't know where that legend comes from. Maybe it's American bias. But they would not have kept this gun from World War I into World War II if that was the reality. We know that World War I was defined by mud. This gun is filthy, as filthy can get. When the Luger is locked up, it actually does a pretty good job of keeping the mud and filth out of the actionable parts, which is also what we've seen with other guns. It's not about if mud gets into the gun. If the mud gets into the gun, you're done. We've seen that with many guns. If you can keep the mud out of the action, you have a pretty good chance that the gun's going to work. And this gun, when in battery, sealed up, does a pretty good job of keeping that filth out of the action.
You know, I think what we can say about this is it is legitimately ammo sensitive.
You're right. Now let me add to that. So I have 2 Lugers. I have this 4-inch P08. This is a World War I gun, by the way. And I've got also another World War I gun. I've got the Longa Pistola 08, where the long pistol, the artillery Luger.
The artillery Luger.
Now, this gun, because I've overhauled it, it actually acts like one would expect. It wants to have hot ammo.
Okay.
And so I found that like the NATO Plus P stuff runs great, and Winchester White Box runs great, but the kind of lower power charge stuff like Blazer or Tula, it doesn't. It tends to cycle funny, doesn't necessarily extract or eject, and so it prefers that.
Okay.
And my LP08, or my artillery Luger, actually, of all things, prefers Perfecta. Now, here's the thing. The 08 Luger, the artillery Luger, when I got it, came firing, ready to go, working. However, I have not gone through and overhauled all the springs and all the things that have been in there for God knows how long.
100 years.
This gun has brand new springs in it. Essentially, from the perspective of the spring tension, it's in factory new condition.
Right. So here's the thing about the Luger. It's an old design. I think a lot of people look at it as Germany's World War II gun. And
got mud in my mouth.
All right, I wonder how that happened.
Oh, yeah. All right.
People assume that this is a more modern gun than it really is because it did serve so long. In reality, this thing's basically the same vintage as the broom handle Mauser. This is an 1890s design.
It's really one of the first real semi-automatic pistols that was viable.
Yeah.
And it was the first one to get military adaptation.
Right, by anyone. So what you have is a legitimately complex action. And when you let that percolate for 100 years, and it's got a bunch of different springs in there and a bunch of precision fit parts, hand-fitted precision fit parts, and those can go bad. And then you have a pistol that becomes unreliable.
I can tell you reliably right this minute that this gun and my 08 artillery Luger are not part for part interchangeable.
Right.
This gun was a old world manufacturing deal. They would make the parts in its rough form, and there was literally a craftsman sitting there fitting the gun together to make it work.
Right.
Then after 100 years or 70 years, springs wear out, things happen. So when I put the springs back in, I got it back to its original design spec.
Right.
But my other one isn't, and that's what's going on here. These are hand-fitted guns, therefore...
And they're worn.
And they're worn, and therefore they are sensitive to the ammo you put in them.
Right.
This is not an issue for a large, giant war machine, because they're going to make a gazillion rounds of 9mm Parabellum, all to spec.
Right.
And the guns are all out of the box new with the same tension and everything.
It's exactly like what we talked about with the M1.
They're good to go.
Right.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't have to design an M1 to use a variety of ammo, just the military ammo.
So 70 or 100 years later, you may find that your Luger doesn't work with a specific type of ammo or doesn't do this or that.
And I think a lot of that gets interpreted as, oh, it must be dirty, and therefore it's not working.
So that being said, a gun that's been gone over by someone who understands the Luger, and I'm not trying to claim a lot, but I do understand the Luger. Do not take these apart all the way unless you understand the Luger. Definitely do not dump one in the mud unless you really understand the Luger, because I have to take this entire thing down to every piece now.
Yeah, pin and everything.
With that in mind, because I understand the system and what has to go on in terms of spring tension, this is original spec. This is essentially working like it would have in World War I, and thus it was a good specimen to dunk in the mud to test. Is this mud problem a reality?
And I think we can pretty conclusively say it is not.
This gun passed the test with flying colors. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider supporting us on our Patreon account. It's what allows us to afford springs and parts to get this Luger working again, or the ammo to waste by dumping it in the mud. If you can't support us, totally understand, totally get it. Please just subscribe to the channel and share with your friends, and thank you for watching.
All right, Carl, you think you can still make hits with that muddy as ick Luger?
I do think so.
Well, let's find out. Whoa. Nice.
Ah! Ah!